Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be diving in and looking at the new face of the Ynnari. So as we all know, the Ynnari got severely slapped down in the last balanced data slate to the point where I think a lot of players are leaving them competitively. We're seeing a mass exodus of, kind of wannabe Eldar players that really never really cared for the faction but jumped on the Ynnari train because it was so good. And quite frankly, it was fun to play for a lot of competitive players. So now that we're seeing all the nerfs, a lot of people are getting out of there and finding new OP armies to play. However, fear not, because I am going to show you guys a way that I think the Ynnari can still be pretty good in this new balanced data slate. Now, I don't think they're going to be the best by any means. I don't think they're going to even break 50% win rate, but I do think that the very dedicated and skilled players who keep with the faction, keep with the detachment, can make it work. But I think we're going to have to rethink how we build and how we play the Ynnari. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive right in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at all the nerfs and how they changed the detachment. We're going to be looking at the new Ynnari general strategy and tactics that I've kind of devised for the new playstyle of the army. We're going to be looking at an example Ynnari list on new recruit that I've made myself. And lastly, we are going to set up and deploy the list on Tabletop Simulator, and I'm going to show you guys a few tricks on what you can do to basically make them effective as well. So first off, let's look at the nerfs. So lethal intent is now limited to infantry and mounted units. It used to be everything, but now it's just infantry and mounted. So vehicles and monsters cannot be affected. It can only proc on units within 6 of the destroyed friendly unit. So basically, if the unit was within 6 of a destroyed unit at the end of the shooting phase, then you will get to move. And the move is only a d6 plus 1 now. That was a heavy nerf that basically made the best part of the detachment, in my honest opinion, guys, almost useless. Again, not totally useless. I'm going to explain why when I go over the Tabletop Simulator setup and stuff, but it is pretty bad. Yvraine's ability also got nerfed from reroll all wounds in the 5 phase to reroll 1s in the 5 phase, and we saw several points nerfs. Archons and Autarchs went up 10 points, Incubi went up 10 points, the Yinkarn went up 10 points, Howling Banshees went up 5, Fire Dragons went up 10, and the 4 Warlock Conclave went up 20. So this was basically to rein in the very skilled and successful players who were playing the detachment how it was supposed to be, and playing some other detachments like, for example, Seer Council. However, these nerfs were very punitive, and unfortunately, they just really didn't make a lot of sense. Sadly. Now, of course, everybody's going to say, yes, the lethal intent needed to get nerfed. That's true, it did, but I think it got nerfed a little too hard. What this has essentially done is it's changed Ynnari from a primarily melee-focused army into an army that is focused more on ranged firepower. So in some of the older Ynnari lists, you saw a lot of units that, could do ranged, but were either short-range shooters or they were melee units. So you saw things like Incubi. You saw things like Howling Banshees. You saw Warp Spiders, which are, short-range units, but they're ranged, but they're short-range. You saw things like Fire Dragons. And sometimes you did see a couple of long-range units here and there, but it was mostly a melee faction, right? And it was primarily going to be dominated by things like the Yinkarn, the Vizark, and Yvraine being pretty good in melee combat. Now we're going to see a little bit of a shift. So here's what I think the new Ynnari general strategy and tactics are going to be. And I believe that Ynnari are still at their core a primary objective control army. I don't think that's changed. Obviously, melee factions that can, kind of deny enemies board space by providing a lot of fights first, a strong fights first unit that can just sit behind a ruin and just, sit their asses there for the entire game and score primary for you, that's going to be a really hard thing for a lot of other opposing armies to deal with, especially against a skilled player. And that's why we're going to have far less effective tools for doing that in the, new data slate with the nerfs. However, here's the thing. We do have access to some really strong combos for holding on to primary and shooting our opponents off of objectives, right? So this detachment has one of the best objective-based stratagems in the game, which is Pall of Dread. Being able to simply sticky an objective that your opponent shot off of it. So the new Tau got a huge buff, right? Death Guard are very good at shooting. All of those kind of armies now have to choose. Do I shoot you off the objective and you sticky it, or do I just charge you? Which is going to eliminate a lot of their power. And again, I'm going to explain why that exactly is when we go over the list and, of course, the tabletop simulator example. We also have some very strong shooting stratagems, perhaps one of the best in the game, in the form of Soul Sight, giving your unit lethal hits and ignores cover. And by the way, this is not just infantry. This is on anything. This could be on a vehicle. This could be on a monster, although you're probably not going to be taking monsters anymore. This could be on a mounted unit. So things like Wind Riders with scatter lasers. People were running this before, but, there wasn't a lot of incentive to bring those units in highly competitive lists because, quite frankly, you just didn't need it, right? Because you had a big bully unit with the Incubi and Yvrain, or, the Vizark or Storm Guardians or whatever, right? You had a big blob of infantry that was really hard to deal with that was controlling primary objectives for you. So you didn't need to necessarily be able to shoot people off of objectives because your opponent knew that if they just walked into the middle of the battlefield, they were going to die. Pretty straight up. Now, what has replaced this in the Ynnari? Like, what has replaced the ability to control primary objectives? And I would say that it's this. Access to specifically Kabbalite warriors is what is going to drive new Ynnari armies forward. So, as we know, Kabbalite warriors provide sticky objectives just like Storm Guardians do. But, unlike Storm Guardians, they can actually split into multiple units with the Venom. And this is what we're going to lean into heavily in our new Ynnari build. Now, in my particular list, I don't have that many Venoms, but you could really lean into this, and Venoms are cheap. Venoms are 70 points. Kabbalite Warriors are 180. So you can take up to 6 Venoms in a list and pack them with Kabbalite Warriors and still be relatively, low on points. So, not use up all your points, basically. And that's pretty cool. And Venoms are pretty good. Venoms are really good into high toughness stuff because they have anti-infantry. They have AP -1, and everything inside gets to shoot. And because, just like I said before, you can target that Venom with Soul Sight, all of a sudden, not only is the Venom getting the lethal hits and ignores cover, but everything inside with the Firing Deck special rule is also getting it because of the fact that Firing Deck counts as the vehicle itself shooting and not the unit inside. So you could be firing a blistering amount of, shooting with lethal hits and ignores cover out of these things. And you could do this every single turn. And you could also provide really good board control with that Venom because it's able to move forward. If people shoot it and kill it on an objective, you can use Pall of Dread, make it sticky, squad comes out. Now your opponent's going to have to also charge that objective to be able to take it. Or you could deploy the Kabbalite Warriors on the other side of it, and then you don't have to worry about a thing, right? Because there's no one going to be able to charge you. You're out of charge range now. So there's a couple of cool things you can do with that. So without further ado, let us go ahead and dive in to the list itself, and let me explain why I chose the things I chose, and of course, some different things that you guys can do for your own lists as well. Alrighty guys, so this is the list on New Recruit, and if we look at it, we have a couple of things here, right? Of course, we need to take either Yvrain or the Incarn as our Warlord. We are going to choose Yvrain because she is just objectively better at shooting in my honest opinion, for the points than the Yncarne is. We're also going to take 2 Autarchs, which are going to be with our Howling Banshee units. Now, yes, they did get nerfed, but they are still really good, and the Ynnari really do need some CP reductions here and there, because we're going to be using things like Soulsight a lot in this particular list type. We don't have access to Eldrad or anything like that, so we're going to have to kind of just go with as much CP reduction as possible. We're also going to be taking advantage of the new rules for discarding secondary. So if we have a secondary we really don't like, we're going to just get rid of it and we're going to flip it to something else, right? And again, things that go along with this detachment are going to be things that we're able to actually score, right? So if we're able to score the objective, then we're going to go ahead and go for that. If we're not able to score it, if it's something that's kind of out of reach or, requires us to charge in with something, then we're probably just going to discard it for something else. I know that seems wild, but in some cases, we're going to just have to go for it because we're going to need that CP for the late game. Okay, and by the way, going second with the new Challenger cards is going to be a huge advantage for this type of army specifically. All right, so let's dive in. So we have the Autarchs. Now, as for our battle line units, we are going to have 4 units of Kabalite Warriors. Now, I know that seems excessive. A lot of people might question that. But Kabalites have the benefit of being one of the cheapest units that you can split up, right? Aside from Witches. But again, Witches just don't do damage. If Witches did more damage, I think I would be more okay with putting them in the list, but they just don't. So we're going to go with the Kabalite Warriors because they have all those special weapons, and we are going to get something really cool out of this. You just have to wait and see. Okay, so we have the 4 units of Kabalite Warriors, and again, they're OC2. They're, battle line units, so of course, we can take more of them in our army. We can take up to 6 units, so we're doing pretty good on those. As for other infantry units, we have 2 units of Fire Dragons. We're going to put these on foot. Again, these are going to kind of follow behind the Howling Banshees. They're going to be our units that we could either, put in Strat Reserve. We can, rapid ingress them later in the battle, or we could just deploy them and use them as a counter to whatever our opponents bring on objectives. So if our opponents are bringing some, tanks, some Blight Haulers, or, fetid bloat drones or whatever, we can move Fire Dragons into position to kill those targets fairly easily. Then we have our Howling Banshees. These are going to be our counter punchers, our units that are going to protect our shooting units from engaging into combat. So there's a lot of armies now out there, guys, that are just going to punch really hard for the cost. Unfortunately, Blood Angels got a big buff for some reason. I don't know why, but essentially all the point decreases that they got are going to amount to about roughly another unit, about another unit for their army. So if they were running, 4 units of Assault Intercessors, maybe now they're going to run 5, right? Basically. So we're going to need a couple of these units to counteract that a little bit so that they can't fully activate on us and just wipe us out. We're going to have a couple of units of Rangers for infiltration and screening, and also move blocking. These are really cheap units. Again, only 55 points. We can put one on an objective. We can string them out to the other objective, and if our opponent shoots, them off of an objective, we can, of course, just sticky either one of them. However, if our opponent charges them, we have a defense for this as well, which is called a reactive move. So we can make our D6 reactive move, and maybe that even puts us into range of a squad of Howling Banshees if we roll good enough, and maybe we get a cheeky heroic intervention, right? So really, Rangers are a really awesome unit in this detachment. We also have 3 units of Warp Spiders, and guys, these are just good because, again, they're good at move blocking, they're good at capturing, scoring objectives, they can get you a lot of points, and they just kill stuff, right? I mean, if we need to kill a unit of Poxwalkers, if we need to kill a unit of, crew, right, that's infiltrating up the battlefield, scouting up the battlefield, and they're going to cause problems for our Rangers so that they don't trade as well and stuff for their points, then our Warp Spiders can deal with that rather easily. And they're also a good Overwatch threat. So, your opponent's not going to just move a fragile unit into Overwatch range. You also have Thousand Suns, which have that new Beastmen or Zangor detachment, which has a ton of Zangors in it, and Warp Spiders are really good at taking those out easily. It's a very fragile detachment. It just has a lot of tricks and stuff, very good competitively, but very fragile. Warp Spiders can get around a lot of that. We also have a unit of Shroud Runners for Ignores Cover. Now, you might be thinking, well, we already have Soul Sight. Why do we need Shroud Runners? Well, as a matter of fact, even though we can use Soul Sight does not affect the whole army. So if we use Soul Sight on something to eliminate one target, your opponent might have another target on the other side of the battlefield that needs to be dealt with as well. So you can't just pick one thing out and kill it and expect to win a game. You need to kill multiple units sometimes to expect to win. So Shroud Runners are going to help you with that by ignoring cover and also being a good scouting objective unit and move blocker as well. They're also fairly durable. And weirdly enough, you know, we do have a couple of things that benefit the Shroud Runners from being durable, such as stealth, right? We can use stealth, or we have stealth on the unit, excuse me, and we have lethal intent, which does affect Shroud Runners. So if your opponent shoots them, for example, and maybe kills something else, these guys can move with lethal intent. Well, actually, I said that a little wrong. If your opponent shoots something within 6 inches of a Shroud Runner unit, which it's pretty easy to do because they do have Scout, and kills it, like if they kill a Ranger unit, your Shroud Runner unit can then move D6+1 and get a better position on the battlefield. Maybe move on to that objective that we didn't hold, right? That we got shot off of. Then we have a single Warwalker with Star Cannons. Again, you can have it with Bright Lances. It's just we have so many Dark Lances in this list, I didn't think we needed more. So yeah, we have a Warwalker with Star Cannons just to apply -1 armor to units. So with the Shroud Runners and the Warwalker, you're effectively at -2 if a unit is in cover. So that can help things like Hoplite Warriors penetrate through that armor and kill that unit. We also have our dedicated transports. So we have 2 Venoms in this list and 2 Raiders. Now, you might be wondering, why not just 4 Venoms? Save the 20 points. The reason why we have the Raiders is for some long-range firepower. So we basically stuff these 2 Raiders with all 4 of the specialist units. So we use the Venoms here to split up the units. All right, we split those units up, and then we put them in the Raiders themselves. Now, we're not going to be able to do it with every unit, but we're going to be able to do it with at least 2 of the units in here, and we can basically create 2 Venoms that are quote-unquote gunboat Venoms that have all the special weapons, and then we can have 2 Raiders filled with, you know, just the full units and all of their shooting glory. So we get kind of like 2 quote-unquote mini Ravagers here. So we're going to have, you know, 2 units with 2 Dark Lances in there, 2 Splinter Cannons, or sorry, 1 Splinter Cannon, 2 Dark Lances, because you have to count the Raider Dark Lance, a Blaster and a Shredder, and then a bunch of rifles. And this is going to allow you to kind of sit back at about 18 inches away from enemy units in cover, but, you know, kind of to the point where your opponent doesn't really want to shoot at you unless they have like a ton of shooting, which a couple of detachments will, but that's okay because, again, if the Raider dies, no big deal. The Warriors come out and then you can move them forward onto objectives, right? So that is pretty cool. And we'll talk about that when we discuss strategy and deployment and stuff like that. So yeah, we have our 4 unit Acolytes here. We're going to put 2 of these squads in Raiders. 2 of them are going to be split up in Venoms. So we have a lot of different variety here. And we have some pretty good punch. So yeah. But again, you know what? I said in the beginning of the video that there would be some different ways to build this. Obviously, if you don't like Raiders, you don't have to do Raiders. You could do more Venoms, right? So you can do 4 Venoms, and you could split all 4 of these units up if you wanted to. And each Venom could have the, you know, all the special weapons and stuff. And then you could walk or put in reserve the little units of 5. So the little units of 5 could come in and basically score objectives later on in the game or provide you some additional firepower if you need it or whatever, right? So that is something else you can do as well. So yeah, overall, this is going to be mainly a shooting army with a lot of move blocking elements as well. And it's going to be trying to eliminate heavy infantry on objectives. I think this is basically what the detachment does best now. Eliminating heavy infantry, heavy targets on objectives that are either in cover or close to cover, so they get a cover save. All right, we're going to go ahead and we're going to put this army on Tabletop Simulator, and I'm going to show you guys some of the deployment tricks and tactics that you can use with this army now to get the most out of it. Alrighty guys, welcome to our Tabletop Simulator setup and example for what I like to call the Ynnari Trashboat. So the Ynnari Trashboat list, basically, just like it sounds, has a lot of trash. We have a bunch of units that are very cheap. Cobbleites, basically when you split them in half, each unit counts as a 55-point unit. So we have a lot of those. We actually have 4 of those in our army. And then we have 2 squads of 10. We have 2 units of 5 Rangers, again, 55 points. We have 2 Venoms, pretty cheap at 70 points each. And we have, a couple of other trash units as well. And most of the units in our army are pretty expendable, right? We're going to use them and we know they're going to pass away throughout the battle, right? So Warp Spiders, Howling Banshees, Shroud Runners, Fire Dragons, those are units that are going to be used and then probably killed in the next turn. So, with that strategy, we have a lot of units on the battlefield. We have a lot of trading potential, and we're going to leverage our Raiders here to do most of the damage in the backfield. Now, you don't have to use Raiders. If you guys want to use something else like Wind Riders with Scatter Lasers, or you want to use Dire Avengers with an Autarch, you want to use any kind of heavy damage dealing unit that's going to be kind of sitting in the back waiting for a moment to spring forward and then hose your opponent with Shuriken Fire or Splinter Fire or a ton of Dark Lances or whatever, a ton of Scatter Lasers, then you can do that. But my particular list has Raiders in it. Doesn't mean it's the best. You can definitely choose other options. Dark Reapers, also another good option, right? 3 units of 5 Dark Reapers are not bad for the points. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at what a setup might look like. So this is Tipping Point on layout number 1. Pretty common layout. I think it remained unchanged in the new setup, in the new balanced data slate for June 2025 to 2026. At least that's what they're calling it. So this is what we got. Right now, the first thing you'll notice is that a lot of things are obviously in transports back here. Your brain can kind of go wherever you think you need her. If you think you need her in a squad of 10 for the late game, put her in a squad of 10. If you think that she's going to be more of an asset in the early game, that's going to be a sacrificial pawn, then you can use her in the early game to great effect, whatever. Okay, so here's our setup. Now, here are a couple of the really cool tricks you can do with Rangers specifically and against your opponent, who, is probably a pretty good player, but might not have the exact counter to what you have in your pocket. So, first turn is really important, especially if you don't get first turn. It means a lot of your stuff is not able to set up. However, we do have Scout on some stuff. Shroud Runners are going to go back here in this little pocket, right? Our Warwalker can, kind of scout to the side if it wants to a little bit, or maybe if our opponent gives us leeway, we can scout up here. Whatever we want to do, right? We're going to check line of sight lanes, we're going to check threat ranges, and we're going to move our scouts accordingly. Now, let's say that our opponent is Space Marines. Space Marines are still very common. They're still very good. People are still winning tournaments with them. Go figure. They didn't really receive any serious nerfs. So we're going to have a squad of 5 Assault Intercessors here. Now, Assault Intercessors, like the name, they want to assault, and they want to get on this objective, and they see this juicy little unit of Rangers right here. And your opponent, licking their chops, is like, you know what? I'm going to declare, Assault Doctrine. I am going to advance and charge, and I am going to just move up my army. So let's say they move 4. They roll a 4, so they get 10 inches. Ooh, Space Marines, right? They get up there 10 inches, and they want to assault you. Well, they have just moved within your range to flee. So that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to roll your dice. And again, I don't know what it's going to come up with, but we get a 3. It's pretty average. Again, 3 or 4 is the average for this. And we're going to move our unit back 3 inches, but we're going to move it away from the objective. Now, we're going to move it directly away. So we're going to move 3 inches here, 3 inches, 3 inches. Again, we're going to move away from that objective as well. We don't want to be anywhere near it. And we're going to be, well, we'll do this, 3 inches, right? So you get all these guys in here, and then this guy moves 3 inches back. Boom. Alrighty, now your opponent has a hard choice to make, because unless they have a 6-inch consolidation move, they're going to have to charge out here. And they're not going to be able to get the objective, right? Actually, as a matter of fact, we probably should have deployed that ranger a little bit farther in just to make sure. So let's just assume that we deployed it inside of this wall right here. We're able to move 3 inches a little bit further that way. So now the charge is a 6-inch charge, which isn't impossible, right? They could still definitely make that charge roll. However, if they just roll a 6, unfortunately, this model here is not exactly going to be able to get into base with this model, which is what's important. This model here, the closest to the objective, is the important key. So they roll their dice. Let's say they roll an average of 7, which means 7 inches. So they're going to be able to move here. 7 inches doesn't even get them into base with that model. So we're going to have to base here, right? We're going to have to base here. Because again, we can't go any farther. Boom. The sergeant doesn't even get there, right? Can't even get into engagement, so it has to come over here. Very hard charge that we made for them. But let's say he comes right here, right? As close as possible. And again, when he piles in, he's going to have to pile into base, which is going to be right here anyway. And then we just kind of move these guys, you know, as close as possible to the wall, 7 inches, so that they get into contact there. Now, when they get to fight, they're going to pile in. Again, boom, have to make it into base. Boom. Whoops. Does he even fit? There we go. Good guy. All right, so they're going to fight us. And if they don't manage to kill everything, which they should kill the full Ranger squad, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They should kill the whole unit. They're basically stuck now, right? They can't really consolidate on the objective, and they have some Rangers here, perhaps, that they can consolidate into, but they can't really get there. So they're not going to be able to get there, right? It's going to be very hard for them to get on the objective. They're just out. Now, when you set up, you have to make sure that's the case, because you have to set it up to where you talk about it with your opponent and be like, hey, you know, if I move away from the objective this many inches, then you're not going to be able to pile in or consolidate back into it. Now, the reason I say that is because I have come across some people who don't exactly move exactly the 3 inches, if you know what I mean, right? You guys know the kind of players I'm talking about. They will say, oh no, it should have been in range, or they'll kind of fudge the movement a little bit with consolidation so they'll be able to get back on the objective. But honestly, if they go first, even if you go against that kind of thing, it's not that big of a deal. But you are basically trading a 55-point unit for an 80-point unit, something that's much more expensive. I think what are regular assault intercessors, they're like 85 points, right? I think so. 80 points, maybe. Okay, so that's one thing you can do, right? Bait your opponents into charging you. Blood Angels players will have a similar thing where they have, excuse me, they have like jump pack intercessors or something like that, where they're kind of, you know, going to come after you. So just place your Rangers like even farther back. Like if you're going against something with the ability to jump, just go farther back, right? Put them right here. Put them right back here so that there's no way they can consolidate back on the objective unless they have a stratagem for it. And if they do have a stratagem and they went first, let them. Let them use the CP to get on the objective. It only benefits you this early in the game. All right, now the other trick you can do is with shooting units, which is I think where this army really kind of comes into play and really has its strengths. So if you have a unit of Space Marines, for example, regular intercessors, or, you know, some other kind of form of infantry, and they want to advance and shoot, so they roll, they get a 4, let's say. All right, we're giving them the benefit of the doubt. Whoops. Let's turn on the measure movement here. so that we can actually measure that movement. So we move them 10 inches. They get to here. All right, we're going to move them a little farther out, but they're going to want to be like right here. Now, at this point, every single one of these models can see our models pretty much regardless of what we do, right? They see right down the line. They're going to see us. Now, no matter what we do here, these guys are going to die. They're going to die a horrible death. So what you're going to do is you're going to reactive move on this objective. Even if you roll a 1, you should be able to tow it, right? But we get there. I guess if you rolled a 6, maybe you could... No, even if you rolled a 6, I don't think they could survive. But basically, you get on this objective. Now, your opponent's going to be like, oh, well, that doesn't do anything. You're going to be like, oh, yeah, whatever, you know? They're going to die, but at least they'll die for a reason. And here's the reason. At the end of your opponent's shooting phase, when these guys have all shot and these guys are dead, you're going to use Pall of Dread. So these guys are going to die. And then you're going to just Pall of Dread the objective, right? You're going to throw a sticky on that objective. Boom. Now that objective is yours. Now that might not seem like a big deal, but it actually is, because that forces your opponent in the next turn to put something on the objective. They have to physically put something on there now, which plays into your strengths. Remember, this army is very deadly over short distances, has a lot of close range shooting units. It can do a lot of damage, but it is very squishy. And a lot of it is going to be based on, you know, being able to trade well. And this kind of plays into that, right? So we've traded well over here. We're going to kill this unit because it's out in the open now. This unit is out in the open. And now they have to put another unit out in the open. And we have used 2 units of Rangers for that. But even so, right? We've used them to great effect. We've used 10% of our army to kill probably about 15 to 16% of their army, depending on what they actually move out, right? We've used much more. This is actually let's say 160. And then whatever they put on this is like 200 and something. So yeah, we've killed... No, I'm sorry. We've used 5% of our army. Excuse me, my math is way off. We used about 5% of our army to kill about 10% of their army or more. And then we could just kind of have our way with these guys, right? We have these scouts. We have these Shroud Runners back here. They can probably pick up a couple of these guys. Ignor's cover. We can bring out our Cobalite Warriors. We can move our Warp Spiders into position to move block and then shoot them to death, right? There's a lot of stuff we can do here. We also have Howling Banshees, but we don't necessarily want to use them for this. But if they're right here, this is a great spot for Howling Banshees. So this is a really easy move right here. We just take these Banshees, move them over here with an advance roll, charge in here, right? Boom. And we use our 6-inch pile-in, so we get, you know, all the way around them. This is important. You need to use that 6-inch pile-in and consolidation to get all the way around. And then we put, you know, we can put the Autarch like right here or whatever, and we kill that unit, and then we can move 6 inches towards this objective. So basically, after we kill this unit here, we don't have to move the full 6. That's the cool thing, right? We can consolidate like this, just to the wall. We're like, all right, we towed the objective. We don't have to consolidate the full distance. Don't have to consolidate the full distance. Don't have to consolidate the full distance. As long as we're moving towards the closest objective, right? We can kind of just move like this, right? Towards the wall. Again, we're not going to be able to move all these models, but the models that can actually tow the objective here from the other side of the ruin are going to be able to be moved. So we're going to be able to move kind of like this, right? Maybe we have like 3 Banshees here. Now, again, that's important because that means our opponent's going to have to not only take this sticky objective away, but they're also going to have to put more than 3 OC on it. So they're not going to be able to just move a Rhino here and call it a day. They're going to have to move something more significant. Okay, let me show you guys another trick that you can use with this army. So another trick is the old Venom switcheroo. So let's say that we have, later in the game, turns 3, we move up our Venom into position, somewhat like this, right? And this, there's a reason for this. We move it, sorry, we're going to move it like right there. Boom, right? Now this gives our opponent some line of sight, but not all. So they can't just come over here on this side and stay safe with a predator. They just can't just move out a little bit and shoot it. They're going to have to do the full thing. So they're going to have to move the predator over here to be able to shoot. Maybe they do tactical doctrine and they advance and shoot, right? So they have line of sight here. The predator fires on the venom. Boom, kills it. This is the first thing that's going to happen. We're going to sticky the objective, right? We're going to do the same thing we always do with Paul of Dread. Sticky the objective, and then the squad inside gets out. We roll our dice. Maybe we lose one, right? Maybe we lose. It should always probably be, in my opinion, the Shredder, but it depends what type of opponent you're going against, right? If your opponent is like Space Marines, it's the Shredder. If your opponent's, Imperial Guard, then you probably want to keep the Shredder if it's like a lot of infantry. So we're going to put these right here. Boom. Right? And maybe your opponent's fine with that and is like, oh, you know what? I don't care about that because I have something that allows me to move in the shooting phase, right? So like 1,000 Suns. Let's say it's a 1,000 Suns vehicle that kills us, right? We go, boom. Venom dies. 1,000 Suns unit, they move up a sorcerer onto this objective, right? Take the sticky away. Actually, I don't know if it works like that, the 1,000 Suns ability. I think it's maybe at the beginning of the shooting phase. But let's just for the sake of argument say that they are able to get something on this objective, right? We have the lethal intent maneuver. So what we could do here is, because this Venom died and because we lost, well, not because we lost the model, but because this Venom was destroyed within 6 inches of the squad, it is now disembarked. We check at the end, right? It was within 6. We can move D6 plus 1 onto the objective. So we can move, that 4 or 5 inches or 3 inches up at the end of the shooting phase and be in a position the next turn to actually do something with this unit other than just sit there and do nothing, right? And we have some heavy weapons in here. The Dark Lance is heavy. The Splinter Cannon's heavy, right? So now we can maybe we just do this instead. Maybe we just get one model on and we're just shooting down range of this Annihilator, and we have more models in range now because of it, right? Whoops. Maybe we have to put the blaster right there. Something like this, right? So maybe we have better range. Again, I don't think we're going to have range, but... Oh, there we go. We have range, right? Boom. So we can possibly shoot it with the blaster and the Dark Lance. And we can also bring this Raider over, right? This Raider can, kind of come over here 12 inches with a pivot. I know I'm moving through a wall there, but, we come forward 10 inches, go forward 2 more inches, right? Because we're going to pivot at some point. Boom. And then we have line of sight to the Raider as well with we have line of sight to the Annihilator with our Raider. We can fire 2 more Dark Lances into it, and we can fire some other stuff into some other targets, right? So we have a lot of options with this army, right? We have long range shooting, we have short range shooting, we have tricks that we can use, right? When our Venoms get destroyed, our models can use lethal intent, which is, usually it's not going to be that good of an ability outside of like a couple of the early game situations, but we can make it more effective into the late game with clever use of Venoms. Moving Venoms forward into position to be destroyed on objectives. We can then sticky the objective, and we can also move our unit of Cabalites up into position, right? So those are a couple of things that we can definitely do to make it more effective. And yeah, that's basically it. And again, we're going to use Warp Spiders for the same thing we always use them for. We're going to try to move block where we can, deny objectives, stuff like that. We're really going to play the, we're going to kind of measure out our resources throughout the game so that we end up, ahead at the end. We have more resources than our opponent. We're able to take more objectives, and we're able to dominate on primary. Okay, guys, that is going to be it for our tabletop simulator example. Hopefully you got something out of this. And I guess one last thing to leave you on is we do have another couple of cool stratagems in this detachment. We do still have Fight on Death. That may not seem like that big of a deal for the most part because we've lost some of the biggest Fight on Death threats like Incubi and stuff. but we do have some other things that can benefit from it. So one of the things you might want to do with your warp spiders is actually give them the power blade or power blade array. That could actually help them. I usually like to give them the shooting weapons, but I think in this specific detachment, having the ability to get fights first and, you know, combination of fights first / fight on death for 2 CP might be worth it. 2 CP is pretty steep, but, you know, if you're not using a lot of CP for whatever reason, that could be something that you could do. You can also shoot when you're damaged. So, boom, this squad shoots at this unit and, you know, probably takes out a couple models, right? And then, this is the great part. You could use lethal intent as well, right? Or you could use it before. It really doesn't matter because your opponent will get to choose the order, but the order doesn't matter. You move and then you shoot and then you move, doesn't matter. Anyway, okay, that is going to be it for our tabletop simulator example. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time. This is going to be the end of today's video. Hopefully this helped you a little bit. Let me know if you guys have any questions or comments in the comment section below. I know the Ynnari detachment got severely nerfed, but I think this is a viable way to play the Ynnari. I'm actually going to be play testing this in the coming weeks just to see if it's actually truly viable competitively. I think in theory it works, but there may be a couple of things I'm not, you know, seeing because I haven't played an actual game with it yet. So time will tell on that one. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, and thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have supported the channel over the last 2.5 years. It's been crazy. It's almost 3 years now, if you can believe it. And if you want to support the channel, join the channel on our, you know, channel Discord or whatever. I will leave the link in the description for that. You just have to sign up for a Patreon free trial. Should be absolutely easy to do. And yeah, you can talk to people like me, and we have some, you know, really competitive players as well that have done really well in tournaments on the Discord who can give you some good advice. Lastly, I do have a channel store page and an Amazon affiliate link. If you want to support the channel through either of those means, feel free. The channel store page, of course, has Eldar inspired apparel, while the Amazon link has a lot of discounted Eldar minis. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today. Peace out, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.